There are two main elements, circumstances and timing, which form the basis or character of our decision. For those of us residing in this community back in 1998, we recall the difficult, lengthy, as well as emotionally charged discussions which took place before a final decision was reached in 2003. It was announced that one site had been selected for the new hospital. No longer would there be a general hospital and a Hotel Dieu hospital. Instead, the former Hotel Dieu site would now be the site for the new Cornwall Community Hospital. What most would recall is the final outcome. However, there were many other implications which may well not have been grasped at the time, since the main concern, and remember that was 10 years ago, was the selecting of one site to house all the acute care services for our community. And so here we are today addressing some of these important but less remembered details as they have become relevant to our time. It would seem that there exists much fear surrounding this topic. By fear, I mean false evidence appearing real. Is there new information since 2003 that is impacting the amalgamation process? No. There are, however, some facts which have either been overlooked or forgotten by so many of us. Jeanette will now highlight the details of our present situation as we journey into the final stages of the amalgamation process, which includes the need for the sale of the 2nd Street site.
Good, thank you, Helen. And I'll draw your attention to the presentation on the screen. So between Mano and I, we will move through the presentation. So the next slide covers the agenda for tonight. We're really hoping to cover a number of items. First of all, outlining our objectives, address why the 2nd Street site is for sale, address other options, or are there other options, the process that is being laid out, answer the question, does the hospital board intend to have community consultations? We know that has been a request. Provide points of clarity, and then certainly answer your questions as we move along. My suggestion is maybe I would go through the presentation and entertain questions for sure at the end. So in terms of our objectives tonight, we just waiting for the slide to catch up. We are hoping to provide information regarding the sale of our 2nd Street site at Cornwall Community Hospital. Is it possible? To provide clarity where there appears to be some confusion and misunderstanding, and certainly to answer your questions. Why is the 2nd Street site for sale? The 2nd Street site is for sale primarily because those are the directions to the Cornwall Community Hospital. Helen made reference to the Health Service Restructuring Commission and the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. When they went across the province of Ontario, and beginning in 1998 and over those next few years, one of the objectives at the time was to gain efficiencies in hospitals, and in many cities where there were 2-site operations, to move to a 1-site operation. So that was really part of the attention to the directions in the future at the 2 hospitals at the time. In 2003, we received our final directions, and among those directions, obviously, were to consolidate at the common site the acute care services. And to accomplish that with an articulated capital plan. The one direction that was contained in that was also to submit to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care for approval the hospital board's recommendation for the disposal of the former Cornwall General surplus lands, buildings, and assets after the programs were transferred to Cornwall. So as we near that date, which I will share with you tonight, is 2014, this is really part of that process. It is anticipated that phase 3 of our construction will be completed and all programs and services will be transferred to McConnell probably about mid-2014. So we're just over a year from now. And that the 2nd Street site at that time will become vacant. There are other reasons, if we could put this into perspective, for the sale of the property. The hospital will have no use for the vacant property, as all of our funded acute care services will be located at McConnell Avenue. We will have no budget to cover the costs of the property at 2nd Street going forward. And these costs would be significant and have a significant impact on our care budget. They would include property tax. After the building is no longer used as a hospital, it does become taxable. We're currently tax exempt. There would be insurance costs, security, grounds maintenance, heating, just enough to maintain the structure, etc. So as I said, these costs would need to come from the hospital's annual operating budget. I know that the ministry does not look to covering those costs going forward. I've had discussions with peers in the industry. Blue Water Health, for example, has a vacant facility, and they're having a difficult time dealing with that liability. And in fact, are at the position I spoke to my peer today, and the mayor of the city is trying to generate enough interest and money to tear the building down, but the costs of that are really very, I think in their case, they're about $7 million estimate. So we just don't have the budget to deal with the liability going forward. The property at 2nd Street site is an asset of the Cornwall Community Hospital. CCH is a non-profit corporation, and it functions under the legislation contained in the Public Hospitals Act. And unlike some other public institutions, for example, it's my understanding when vacant schools come about that there's an obligation that these surplus properties are made available and provided first to other school boards, etc. But those same obligations and understanding do not exist in the case of a vacant hospital, nor is there any means to manage the liability associated with the surplus properties. The Public Hospitals Act does provide that any disposition of land and buildings must be approved by the Ministry of Health. And we actually are in that process working through the ministry, and they have been kept up to date with where we are in the process. So the question is, are there other options? And I think there are really two answers. The first answer is no, there are no other options for Cornwall Community Hospital. Our mandate is to provide acute care services to our catchment area. The entire community and the province has worked for years at consolidating acute care services at McConnell in the interest of improved quality care and the efficient delivery of care. And I think what's important here, the takeaway, is that that is our mandate as an acute care hospital on the public hospital side. We're not in any other business. However, having said that, in terms of options, the answer is yes, in that there are potentially many options for the use of the property, and we're hoping to gain some interest from individuals, groups, developers, whoever it may be, that have a vision, and we encourage them to approach our realtor through the articulated process. The Champlain, so I indicated that the Champlain Land and the Ministry have been involved in terms of process, and we're working through that with the Ministry. The properties have been listed, as you know, with Remax Cornwall, with the following direction. And this direction has been amended from the original. Originally, the hospital board had indicated that they did not wish to receive any offers prior to, I think the date was January 15th, and that the offers needed to remain in effect until January 25th. Those dates have been changed. Given the interest in the property, it came recommended by a realtor that we actually extend those dates. And so to provide sufficient time to market the properties and to ensure that we've created appropriate awareness. Does the hospital board intend to have community consultation? The hospital board did not consider and will not be holding community consultations because the Cornwall Community Hospital Corporation has been directed and has agreed to provide all of our services at the McConnell Avenue site. We are not comfortable posing for community consultation when there's really no other answer for us or no other direction in which we can proceed. The hospital does not have the mandate, the budget, or approvals to provide other healthcare services, such as long-term care. We're not a long-term care provider. There are a number of points that we would like to provide clarity on. First, the 2nd Street site is currently occupied with the following programs and services. Some of you may know this if you've been to some of the clinics, etc., over the past number of years, but at this point, we've consolidated everything at McConnell aside from our inpatient mental health program, the dialysis unit, ambulatory programs and clinics, nuclear medicine and radiology, the foundation, some of our IT services and main servers are there, withdrawal management, and a temporary assess and restore unit. The 2 lines noted in bold, both nuclear medicine and a temporary assess and restore unit, will be moving in the next couple of months. Nuclear med will go into the new building in diagnostic, and as you know, the temporary assess and restore unit that's operated by St. Joe's is closing. But apart from that, all of the other services will remain in operation on 2nd Street site until phase 3 is completed, which is expected to be mid-2014. Further clarity on the assess and restore unit, that was established with the Champlain Lynn and St. Joseph's Continuing Care Center in 2011. It was a temporary measure aimed at assisting seniors to regain strength after an acute care episode, allowing them to return home. The intent of the program was that the seniors would leave their acute care stay and be provided with a little more rehab, etc., enabling them to return home. And the thinking at the time, quite honestly, was that the Home First program was just being introduced, but we didn't have, or any of the providers didn't have comfort in the success of that program at that point. It was just new. And we all came together and suggested that, and our contribution was the site at the time, but suggested that we needed time for that program to get on its feet. These patients that are or residents that are in the assess and restore unit are actually discharged from CCH and admitted to St. Joseph's Continuing Care Center. The beds are not operated by the hospital, and in fact these beds are not long-term care beds. They're not funded under the long-term care program, and the accommodations, and this is significant, do not meet the physical design standards for long-term care. The design standards for long-term care were introduced in 1999, and I'm quite familiar with them because we were working on the St. Joseph's Villa redesign at the time. And what I can say is that long-term care beds that are built today and since that time are new builds. They're not renovations. I know that we could not meet the design standards, even with the St. Joseph's Villa, which was built as a home, let alone trying to meet those standards in something that was built for a hospital, etc. I'm telling you, the standards are very detailed. And I don't know of any new builds that have not been rebuilt. So the hospital board is clearly not disputing the need for enhanced senior care, particularly in light of our aging population. In fact, we have a proposal currently before the Ministry of Health to operate 15 geriatric rehab beds as part of our post-construction operating funding negotiations. So those are the negotiations that are currently going on around what volumes of service and programs are going to be operated in the new building. What we haven't been able to do is conclude those negotiations, but they continue to be underway. And they don't only include the discussion around geriatric rehab beds. We've also asked for additional surgical beds, mental health beds, etc., surgical volumes, so as to increase our capacity in terms of serving our community. If approved and funded, these beds will definitely complement the assess and restore beds that will remain at St. Joseph's Continuing Care, not to be confused with the 32 beds that are currently at 2nd Street. St. Joseph's offers an assess and restore program on York Street. It appears clear from recent information provided from the Champlain that there is no plan for additional long-term care beds in our area. And while investments in the senior strategy is articulated in the recent Ontario Action Plan for Healthcare, the strategy does not provide for provincial long-term care beds. And I think that that is true of either provincial party right now. Long-term care beds should not be, and they often are, confused with retirement residences. These facilities do not have Ministry of Health and long-term care design requirements and are therefore much more flexible in terms of working within an existing footprint. These facilities are typically privately operated and are not operated under provincial funding. So in summary, the hospital board understands and respects the important housing and daily needs of our seniors. We also appreciate the passion of people seeking to address these needs. We do not, however, have the mandate or the means to redevelop the site. And we must move forward with the disposition of the property that will become vacant, as we recognize our responsibilities and our obligations for the provision of acute care services in the community. And thanks to so many, including this council, we will have a state-of-the-art facility from which we will provide those services. And that is a great shot of what that new facility is starting to